Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark Stay.
And I'm Mark DeVoe, and we want to say thank you to everyone for joining us again this week. We're really delighted you're here, and we want to say thank you especially to our new supporters of the podcast, and in particular to Sonia, who signed up for that was one of our patrons this week. Sonia, thank you so much. And if you would like to be like Sonia, pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support and get loads and loads of bonus goodies. Not least, some extended versions of this podcast, some deep dives on very specific subject matter, and all kinds of amazing goodies. So do come along and join us and support this podcast. Mr. Stay, there's tons and tons of dates happening this week. Let's just run through them.
Yes, gather round, everyone. Gather round. So get your file effects out. Okay, turn to
Palm Pilots.
Exactly, Palm Pilot. My wife still uses a file effect. She swears by it. So yeah, she's still paper done. And you know, we've got, because we're an all Apple family, all Apple devices. So we use the Apple, diary to coordinate everything, except Claire. She's got to do it on paper, and if it's not on paper, it doesn't happen.
I like Claire. I like people who use paper. I think it's underrated, personally.
So I did have a colleague at Orion who got really, really annoyed if we ever moved a meeting because it meant getting the Tipex out.
I love it. Oh my gosh.
But anyway, yes, gather ye round, children. Gather ye round. Get your diaries out. So this episode's going out Monday, 17th of April, 2023. This week is London Book Fair. And I'm going to be there for a couple of days. So Wednesday the 19th, I'm doing a thing called Be Yourself Online. It's at 5:00 at the London Book Fair. It's part of the Bite the Book thing. There's a whole networking thing afterwards. So we're going to be talking about, going online, being yourself, websites, social media, all that good stuff, and lots of catching up afterwards. So that'll be a good one if you're at the book fair as an author. And then on Thursday 20th, I'll be talking to the author Sophie Keach. She's got a new audio book out, an audio first book. That's at 1:00. So that's London Book Fair. Okay. So if you're going to that, I'll see you there. Say hello. We talked about this last week, didn't we? I've got a presentation, which I'm calling What Next? So it's for authors who've done their first draft and they're going to go out to agents, or they're thinking of self-publishing or going to digital first publishers, or they're just thinking, well, I've written my book, what next? So I'm doing a whole presentation about that. It's going to be on Monday, 24th of April, which is very soon. And Mr. D, they can register for this, can't they?
Yeah, they can. So we're going to be doing this presentation in the Academy. So if you would like to be a part of that, if you're an Academy member already, it's going to be just part of your monthly wonderful goodies that you get from us in the Academy. But if you're not in the Academy and you've always been interested in what is the Academy and I'd like to try it out, well, you're invited to come along if you're a patron. So sign up to become a patron if you want to be, which is, it costs barely anything to become a patron, folks. So just do that anyway, regardless. But come along and come to the Academy. Mark and I will be there. It'll be a double session. I'll be introducing Mr. Stay, and there's and the great thing is there's a Q&A section at the end as well. So it's interactive. It's going to be on Zoom. But this is also not just for people who finished their book or they're coming to the end of their book. I think it's just as important for anyone who's starting their book out, because it's about thinking about, I love Stephen Covey's quote. He always said, think with the end in mind. And I think if you're starting on the journey of the book, it's all really important to start thinking about what you might want to do when you finished your book. Do you want to publish it directly as an independent author? Do you want to pitch it? And how does that work? And Mark's going to be covering all those things. So do come along to register for that. You can do that on the homepage of the Academy. So you simply go to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. And the thing I'm really excited about, Mark, is there's an opportunity for us to see and meet some of the people who listen to this show who we've maybe never interacted with. So just come along so we can say hello and get to know who you are a bit as well and find out a bit more about what you're working on. So that's the 24th of April. Now, that is happening at 8 p.m. UK time. It'll be 12 p.m. PST, that's West Coast America, and 3 p.m. if you're somewhere in the middle, that's around the New York, Toronto area. And then it'll be, I believe, 5 a.m. in the morning if you're in Australia. I know that's very early, but we have people in the Academy. We do. In Australia and New Zealand, and they show up for the coaching at 5 a.m. I mean, talk about dedicated. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's a great way of getting your words in the morning as well after the track coaching. So do pop along, academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. get your name in. The form is now live. We might have to limit numbers if there's a lot of people who want to come. So, make sure you get in early.
And after that, same week, actually, 27th of April, the Unwelcome spoiler special. So we're going to be talking about my film, Unwelcome, and we're going to have some special guests. So we might have the director, John Wright. I know he's busy at the moment. We're going to have our VFX supervisor, Paddy Eason, the cinematographer, Hamish Doyne-Ditmas, the first AD, Terry Bamber, and the actor, Rick Warden, who wrangled our red caps. It's going to be lots and lots of fun. So if you've seen Unwelcome and you've got all sorts of questions about it, you will get answers. So come along to that.
Am I right in thinking, Mark, that the people that worked on your film, some of them also worked on Harry Potter and Star Wars?
Oh,
in some capacity.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so folks, if you're a Harry Potter and a Star Wars fan, this is an opportunity.
And Bond.
And Bond. Yeah, it's an opportunity to meet some of the people behind these films and ask questions. So if you want to be a part of that, it's going to be absolutely huge amount of fun. The way to find out how that's happening is very simple. You sign up to the Bestseller Experiment newsletter and you will get information on the, where it's happening. We'll send you the URL. We'll send you a reminder just before it happens. So to do that, go to bestsellerexperiment.com / well, not stop / go to bestsellerexperiment.com and click on the newsletter icon, put your name in, and you will be on the list to join us. And it's going to be a riot. It always is. I don't think we've ever actually, in my memory of 6 years plus of this podcast now, Mark, I don't think we've ever done a live show with that number of special guests. It's going to be absolute pandemonium and brilliance.
Wrangling cats comes to mind.
Wrangling cats.
Because this is the other thing is this, when you and I speak, it's all very civilized. We're very professional.
Yeah.
This lot, I have no idea where this is going.
You like being down a London pub on Friday night.
It might be. Yeah.
But listen, folks, it's a free event, so just come along and enjoy the fun and see what happens when Mark and I let a load of people into the same room. It's going to be brilliant. So there's just so much coming. And one other thing we're going to tease you with, folks, before we dive into this amazing interview we've got this week, is we are launching next month, starting May 1st, which is a Monday, which is a Bestseller Experiment release day for our podcast. We are starting the May 200-word challenge. Dun, dun, dun. And if you're interested in finding out what that means, and if you're interested in finding out what it means if you've already been doing it and how you can get involved, we're going to talk about it after the interview. So meet us after the interview. But Mark, tell us about this incredible interview we've got today. I think it's one of the most in-depth we've done actually on the podcast.
It's a whopper, but we don't muck around. This is, you get value for money on this one. I tell you, this is JS Monroe, who is actually Jon Stock, also known as Jon Stock. Now, he worked as a foreign correspondent in Delhi before becoming a full-time writer. His psychological thriller Find Me became a bestseller in 2017. That was under the name Jon Stock. He's the author of 5 spy thrillers. Then Warner Brothers, there you go, there's a name I know. They bought the film rights to the Dead Spy Running trilogy, which was going to be written by the Oscar-winning screenwriter Stephen Gaghan, who wrote Traffic and Syriana. And he was going to write the screenplay for Dead Spy Running. We talk about that a lot in this interview. It's a fascinating story. But now he's back. He's back. He's writing as JS Monroe with No Place to Hide, which is a thriller with a Faustian pact at its heart. And we discuss how he launched his debut novel with a party at the top of Canary Wharf for virtually nothing, how reinvention has sustained his career, and how there's a weird alchemy at play when it comes to bestsellers.
Brilliant. Folks, sit back, get yourself a cup of tea. This is an amazing interview and it's packed full of the most brilliant advice. So enjoy listening with Mark chatting with the absolutely brilliant JS Monroe.
Jon Monroe, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
Very well, thank you. Very well.
Excellent stuff. Now, I've got a proof copy here. The publisher sent me a proof copy of No Place to Hide. And what I love is it opens with a quote from Christopher Marlowe from Dr. Faustus. Now, I'm just up the road from Canterbury, so we know all about Kit Marlowe and Faustus here. And there's a bit of a Faustian pact in No Place to Hide, isn't there? Tell us about that and the influence of Faust.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things I've been wanting to do for a while. I always think Dr. Faustus by Marlowe is a sort of slightly underrated play, and people forget about some of the wonderful lines. Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium? Is the one people forget that came from this play. And I think we all use this expression, a Faustian pact. And perhaps, we don't always realize quite what it means. And it's I mean, somebody who writes psychological thrillers, it's a fantastically dark and brutal arrangement that Faustus enters into. And I tried to do in No Place to Hide, a sort of loose retelling of the Faustus story, in the sense that my main character, Adam, is a high-flying, successful doctor. He's got a lovely wife, young children, living in southeast London, work's going very well. He's a sort of consultant pediatrician at Lewisham Hospital. And then something happens, his past catches up with him. And in the Faust story, Faustus makes a pact with the devil, and he kind of rather dismisses it because he wants unlimited power and knowledge. And the devil says, yeah, you can have that, but in 24 years' time, I want your soul. This idea of selling your soul, again, comes from the Faustus story. And so my man, Adam, Dr. Adam Pound, when he was at university, something as a medical student, a sort of slightly riotous time at Cambridge Medical School, he went to a party and something awful happened. Absolutely, truly awful, and in which he was blamed for, he was sort of implicated in, and he made an arrangement with someone to cover this up, and thought nothing else of it. And the strange person who was witness to what had happened sort of said, "Well, no problems, but I'd like to make a film of your life." At some point, he was trying to make a little film when they were at university together, and in 24 years' time, maybe I'll come and do that. And he says, "Okay, no problems." He never thinks he'll see him again. 24 years later, Adam's life spectacularly implodes. His career falls apart. His marriage collapses. His family, the pressures and strains on his family are awful. And it all happens because his past catches up with him. And I just was really intrigued with that. And I think we all kind of make pacts in our different ways, compromises, trade-offs. And I just really wanted to explore that in the book. And without it, you don't have to know Dr. Faustus. And I kind of, thank goodness for editors, eh? I mean, actually, one of my editors hadn't read it, one of them had. And the one who hadn't said, look, sounds an amazing play. I've never read it. But you can't assume any knowledge at all. And that's always a good, I think a really good thing to remember, is that you never underestimate your reader's intelligence, but you mustn't assume knowledge. And so I kind of set about writing the book with some quite, I hope not too heavy sort of info dumps about the play, trying to spread it across, but so people perhaps learn a little bit about the play as well, while also having hopefully a terrifying white knuckle ride.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. It's a very light dusting. It gives you just enough. So if you know about it, you know what's going to happen. You it kind of works on two levels. You kind of know there are not good things ahead, or if not, it gives you a little signpost. It's terrific. Another influence on this is Sun Tzu's The Art of War, I believe. So yes. What is it about these older texts that make them still so influential now?
I mean, there's a character in the book called G-Ma, and actually a couple of days a week I help out with help students writing essays at Mansfield College, Oxford, as part of the Royal Literary Fund. They send 100 writers every year around to university campuses. And one of my students is this chap, G-Ma, who has a encyclopedic knowledge of Sun Tzu's philosophy and Confucius and things. And the really good guys, the ones who, he was writing a long time ago, the really good ones deal with kind of eternal truths and bits of advice, And he just used to quote little bits of this to me sometimes, reflecting on his own life. And, one of the ones that stuck with me was, if you're in a battle or some sort of conflict, appear weak when you are strong and appear strong when you are weak. Right. And I thought that was really I liked some of that. And again, I just wanted to sort of drop in a bit of that. And it was quite interesting writing a character, a Chinese character in the book who is studying here. And it was really nice to be able to have G help me with that portrayal, although he is the real G is an international law student doing a DPhil in international law. He's not a techpreneur as he is in the book. And in the book, G-Ma is a Chinese student 24 years earlier, when the book is set in Cambridge 24 years early, and they come up and they're still friends 24 years later, where G-Ma has since become a high-flying techpreneur. So it was really nice because you have to be, we're all aware of the dangers of cultural appropriation, telling stories which aren't ours to tell. And I was quite anxious about that, but I feel I had kind of G in the writing cockpit with me, and he was able to help and advise on how to make the character as authentic as possible. And I hope that, and funny enough, some people have said that that's their their favorite character is G, with these little pearls of wisdom he throws out every now and then based on Sun Tzu and Confucius.
Excellent. I do. Whenever you write out of your own experience, I think whether it's a character or some expertise or technical thing, it's all part of your due diligence to check these things and research these things. You go
Absolutely.
very heavy with research up front, don't you? You research quite heavily before you write. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to write. I have a file. I create a file, and I probably have between 30 and 50,000 words of notes. They're not all my own writings, things I'm kind of like a magpie collecting and I'm putting into that file. And it gets to sort of critical mass where I then know I'm ready to start writing the novel. And I do a lot of real world research, I guess. I try to incorporate in my thrillers stuff which is really happening in the world, whether it's sort of the dangers of the nation becoming addicted to antipsychotic medication like the opioid crisis in America, the dangers of the dark web, which is something that features heavily in No Place to Hide, or one of my first books, Find Me, that dealt with sort of post-bereavement hallucinations, when you've lost someone very close to you and you think you see them around the place. So I do a lot of real world research and talk to a lot of people, and for some reason it has seemed to have kind of started to circle around these issues of contemporary medicine, pharmacology, big pharma, and psychiatry. And in fact, my next book it's just been announced this week as a non-fiction book about a psychiatrist, a really scary psychiatrist from the 1950s and 60s, who kind of occupies the same sort of world I write about when I'm fictionalizing my world in JS Monroe thrillers. So I do like to, a lot of work up front, and then try and wear that research lightly. I think that's a really something which, again, I was told quite early on. Don't try and show off your knowledge. Don't try and show how much research you've done. You just got to underpin it. It's the sort of the plumbing and wiring of the novel, which is sort of out of sight, but it's all got to work, because there's going to be someone like you who knows your Marlowe, you see, and you read the book and you're going to make sure you want to make sure that the bits are actually right, but you also don't want to alienate the person who doesn't have any of that knowledge, and so you have to wear your research lightly. But I do really enjoy the research, a lot.
I love that image of it as the plumbing and wiring. That's a great description of it. You mentioned earlier reaching a critical mass of research and then knowing that you've got a story. What are the elements that need to be in place when you go, okay, this is it, I know I can sit down and write a novel now? What are those elements that you need to move forward? I
think the main things are, knowing how you're going to tell the story, and whether you're going to have it, in this particular case, in No Place to Hide, I've got present now, the present world, and I've got 24 years earlier. So you're knowing that basic structure. You also got to know your points of view. And I normally have 3 different points of view. So it's like a camera moving around, looking at over the shoulder of different characters. I'll do third person close generally, and 3 points of view. But for this one, I decided to do one person, just the point of view of Adam. And I'll do it in the present day and in the past. And I decided that quite early on. So you have to get those things fixed. Then you want to make sure you've got your key kind of tentpole characters, the main characters who are going to be propping up the whole thing, and make sure they're fully rounded. My temptation always, I think, as thriller writers, it's a common one, is that you want to get on and tell the story. And I always have to check myself, say, no, look, spend some time on the characters, because that will pay off, and some of the story will come out of those characters and how they behave. So don't try and skimp on the getting the characters fully rounded. And then a lot of people differ on this. I know how the story's going to start, and I know how it's going to end, and I don't know the bits in the middle. And but I have enough. I think No Place to Hide is my 10th novel now. I have enough trust in the in the process of storytelling to know that if you structure it too carefully, if you really map it out really, really carefully, you restrict yourself. Because ideas pop into your head as you're writing, and you want to go down a few little avenues and things. And I think you get better at knowing when it's working, when it's not. And without sounding too pretentious, it's kind of like following a path through the woods. And I've got better now at following the path. And if I do stray off it, I know to sort of stop and get back onto the path before I've written too many words. Yes. So I will know I won't ever write to like 3 or 4 chapters and think, oh no, I've got it wrong. This is the wrong direction. I kind of, on my dashboard, a red flashing light start flashing quite early on if I know I'm going off message. So it's very weird. You do kind of it's like telling a joke. You know the punchline, but you might tell it slightly differently. You know, and I do it. What doesn't suit everyone. I remember hearing years ago, Robert Harris was on Newsnight explaining his second book. He had success with Fatherland. I can't remember what the second book was called, and it was he plotted it out, the whole thing, chapter by chapter, and had walls covered with all these white A4 sheets of what he's going to do throughout the whole thing. And perhaps the reason why I can't remember what it was called, that book, is because it was his least successful one. He's never done that again since.
It's funny. I remember watching that as a young writer, watching that, and he was talking about A plots and B plots and the X axis and the Y axis. So I was thinking, is that what I have to do? And I got to say, Robert Harris, that threw me off for years. So, if you ever want to come on the podcast and explain yourself, I remember seeing that and being kind of a bit, because I loved Fatherland.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And it didn't work for him, and he didn't do it again.
Interesting.
So thanks for that. Yeah.
I remember just going back to what you were saying about being characters being fully rounded. What sort of character work are you doing before you write the novel? Is it sort of character biographies or just notes on their sort of arc?
I will generally have I'll generally have a kind of, again, because I'm quite disorganized, I have to force myself to have lots of different Word documents for different characters and things. And I in the early days, I thought you had to start with a blank canvas and just come up with a character out of nothing. And I realize now, and I think any writer who tells you they don't kind of base characters on people they know in real life is probably lying. What I tend to do is build a composite character. So I'll take a bit of someone I know's, the way he talks, and then I'll take another character of the way he's had 4 wives or something, and he's put that, and you kind of put them all these different aspects of someone's life and someone's past. Another person over there, I'll take a bit of there, and you put it all together. So you are using kind of authentic character traits. But what I do, my element of creativity in terms of creating a character is putting those real life things, aspects and traits of personality I've seen, and putting them together in a way which doesn't exist in the real world, but hopefully makes for an interesting character. So bits of G. Marr in the book are actually based on G. Marr, who I know at Oxford, but an awful lot of other stuff is based on other people who I've met. Has nothing to do with him. I've tried to tell him that because he's terribly excited he's going to be in a book. I keep saying there are a lot of aspects of this, like you are a billionaire techpreneur living in Mayfair. Isn't you, is it? Because he's a really hard up law student in Oxford, So you have to sort of. So yes, I do that, and I think that's the other really. You just mentioned it there, the character arc, and I think that's something which it can't be underestimated, that how a character kind of progresses and changes, and I think they make for the most interesting stories. That there is a progression, there's a development in that character and how they are in the book.
Very much so. Also, you mentioned their thinking and point of view, and particularly you talked about the point of view being very close, like a camera. And I just want to go back, because you started out as a journalist, but you also, I believe, you went on the Carlton TV screenwriters course. So was that a big turning point for you? Or did that sort of develop your story thinking in that sort of visual style?
It did, actually. It did. I remember it's Carlton TV is, it was a long time ago now, but it was a wonderful course. And it was one of those turning points in my life where I also at the same time got this opportunity to go and be, it was in 1998, to go and be a foreign correspondent in Delhi. And I went for that and have no regrets. But I did this Carlton screenwriting course and I didn't pursue it. And it would have been a great way in there. I think a lot of people on that course went on to write episodes for London Bridge and things like that, other sort of TV dramas, which needed a huge amount of content all the time. But it was a really nice guy who ran it. And one of the things that stayed with me, which I'm sure you'll know in your experience of screenwriting is, and I think it does carry across to writing novels, is getting into a scene as late as you can and getting out of a scene as early as you can.
Yeah.
And just boiling it down and just thinking really hard, what is the essence? What's the pith of this scene? What are you really trying to do in this particular scene? And I think that stayed with me. And I think the character arc, and I think that discipline of, they were teaching us then, in those days it was 90 minutes and you had 3 acts and you had to kind of really think about it in that quite a straitjacket way and you realized that there was an awful lot more craft perhaps than art in writing scripts. And it was, you obviously had the sparkling ideas and things that would raise it above that, but it was a technical nuts and bolts job, and I think that people forget about that people think it's going to be just sitting at your desk waiting for the muse to strike. But when you have to work within those sort of tight architecture of a script, it teaches you a lot of discipline about writing.
It certainly does. Certainly does. Let's talk about your first novel, The Riot Act, which came out in 1997, published by Serpent's Tail, which I believe had a launch on the top floor of Canary Wharf, which must have been very exciting. How did that come about, and what were your big lessons from that, the launch of that first novel?
Yes, I set myself an ambitious target, trying to have my first novel published by the age of 30, and I didn't quite do that. And we were living in Greenwich in southeast London, and there was a community of people who were living in canal boats down on the creek there in East Greenwich, and it was a sense of place was very strong in the Riot Act, and it was also set in Cornwall, where I'd been going a lot. My wife's family are from Cornwall, and I came up with a kind of real anti-hero, the strongest anti-hero I've ever done. He was a very obnoxious kind of anarchist rioter called Dutchy, who was kind of a little bit based on Swampy, who was a protester in those days in the 90s, but a bit more edgy. And he'd had a difficult relationship with his father. And actually, he was from a bit more of a sort of middle-class background than he liked to admit. And there were a lot of conflicting aspects of his character. But ultimately, he was in love with this woman who was killed at the beginning of the story. And he wants to find out who killed her. And it was quite an angry, dark book in a way. And I remember my late father, saying it's a shame I didn't write a nicer book. And he really enjoyed it, but he said it was a bit dark. But it was I think it was of its time. We still had a lot of bombs going off in the 90s in London, and the IRA was still bombing. They'd bombed Docklands quite recently, and Canary Wharf had only recently been built, and it was quite a target. And I was working for the Telegraph at the time. We were on the 11th to the 16th floor. There was no 13th floor. And then the Independent and the Mirror were above us, up to floor 21. And then the rest of the Canary Wharf Tower was empty.
Yeah.
Nothing there. And so at night, the lights only went on up to floor 21. So I went to ask the tower management people, property management company in the basement. I said, could I borrow the top floor for an evening for a party? And they said, sure. I think it was 250 quid, which I couldn't afford. So I went to Serpent's Tail, a lovely guy called Pete Ayrton, who ran Serpent's Tail for many years. I think he's retired now, and we split it 50-50. And of course, 350 people turned up this launch party, not to hear the Riot Act and my little reading of the Riot Act and things. It was to see the views, the wonderful views. And it was this ghostly office, just a huge, great floor with nothing in it, bits of furniture around the place, and totally deserted. And a lot of the finale of the book is set in the top of Canary Wharf Tower. And those scenes we set on, a friend of mine put them on Perspex and put them against the window, blown up really big, so people could read the chapter on the glass, looking out across London in the evening. And there were different days. We got Champagne Pommery. We rang them up and said, can you give us some champagne? They said yes. Cobra Beer gave us hundreds of bottles of beer. They were just launching in London. And it was a total knees up. It was great. And my wife was very pregnant with our first child, who's now 25. So it was an evening to remember. We just didn't hire any staff at all. So my wife Hilary's parents and my father and stepmother spent the whole evening having to open bottles of beer and champagne because we had no staff. But it was good fun. It was of its moment, of its time. And I got the news that I'd sent it out to a few publishers directly myself. And I was working in South India actually at the time from an English-speaking magazine. It wasn't Delhi. It was South India in Kochi in Kerala. I was working on an English language magazine. This fax came through from Pete Ayrton very slowly and very stretched, and said, "Dear John, we would like to publish the Riot Act. I can offer you £1,500." And this came through on the fax, all stretched. And I turned to this Indian colleague of mine and just gave him this enormous hug. And he was sort of like, whoa. And I said, this is the best news I've ever had. And I remember that moment, it coming through on the fax in the depths of South India, and this lovely message. And so it came out. That was in 96. It came out in 97. Yeah.
Fantastic. The numbers in that. I mean, what would a book launch on the top of Canary Wharf cost today? You need a Russian oligarch to fund that for you, wouldn't you? I mean,
it was only 3 years later. Then got taken over by the London Olympic Committee. Once London had got the contract for the 2012 Olympics, that was their headquarters, and it became this incredibly flash office. But we used to have a security guard at the Telegraph who, for a fiver, would take you up onto the top of the tower, and you can go outside and walk around that pyramid. He would show you out the back door, and you can have a look out there. And the scene in the Riot Act, the finale, is in the pyramid on the inside of the top of that tower, and it was a very eerie place. I just remember the wind, the sort of plangent wind, and it was I thought there and then that's a great setting for a finale.
Oh, listeners, that sounds like a day out. We should have a group outing, grab a bus. We'll have to do that one day. Then Riot Act was followed by the Cardamom Club, which has since been reissued as the India Spy. And then you have Dead Spy Running, which is the first of the Daniel Marchant trilogy.
Yes, so the Cardamom Club and the India Spy, same book. Yes, that's basically based on my travels and experience in India. And I think in the publishing was what's known as a quiet book.
Right.
I was still quite fond of it. I didn't have much structure. It had a lot of quite descriptive color and descriptions of India. But yeah, so I was in, I wrote that in 2003. So 97, the Riot Act. We had a young family then. I was trying to earn a living as a journalist. I then got a full-time job as the weekend editor of the Telegraph, looking after lifestyle stuff. And I was commuting from Wiltshire. So I wrote Dead Spy Running, the first 25,000 words, on the train in the mornings, right, and in less so in the evenings. I was a bit tired, but I wrote it on the train, entirely on the train. And I did this first 25,000 words, and then I wanted to get an agent. I didn't have an agent after the quietness of the Cardamom Club, and so I started sending it out to agents. And I remember I sent it out to one agent, a well-known agent, and I'm sure people would understand the language. It was, thank you for sending me Dead Spy Running. I enjoyed it, but don't quite love it enough to take it out to publishers. And that, one of those great expressions, I don't quite love it enough. What they mean is they didn't like it. I don't know why they didn't just say it, but, they didn't quite like it. So that same 25,000 words I then sent to Claire Conrad Patterson, now at Janklow Nesbitt. And a couple of days later, you've got to bear in mind exactly the same 25,000 words. I got an email back saying, "Thank you for sending me the first 25,000 words. I'm loving every single word. Please send me more."
Wow.
And it was the same words. Yeah. And I always, when I'm giving talks and things, I always say to people, you have to have that element of self-belief. And it's such a fine line between being picked up by an agent and not being picked up by an agent, or being published and not being published. And it's like when you've crossed over, you look back and think, well, how did that happen? And you think, I'm no different from what I was before I crossed over that line. My words are no different. It's just a hugely subjective business we're trying to apply our trade in. And there's a lot of luck, and there's a lot of getting the right person. So Claire asked for the rest of the book, which I sent over. We had that kind of dream scenario. I had two, books that didn't do that well. The Riot Act was sold to France and things, and it was, it was okay. There'd been some film interest and things, but nothing had really happened. But suddenly we had this situation with Dead Spy Running where we had six publishers bidding for it, and it ended up with HarperCollins, and it was going to 6 months before it came out. We had this approach from Warner Brothers, who then bought the film rights for what in those days was they bought an option for. I mean, it was good. You wouldn't get it now. It was a good 6-figure option. And that was very, very exciting, and it was the start of a roller coaster 5 years, I have to say. Well,
this is great. Listeners, you should know we ask our authors to complete a form before they come on, and say anything else you want to tell us. And Jon said, Dead Spy Running was optioned by Warner Brothers, nearly turned into a film. They spent $10 million developing it over 5 years, and then walked away. And it's a very familiar story, but yeah. And also on the website, and I'll put a link to this, listeners, so you can check this out. There are a couple of sizzle reels, which are sort of trailers that filmmakers put together from other movies to give financiers and other producers and what have you an idea of the tone and the pace of the film and how they could sell it. And these are full of clips from the Bourne movies and Bond movies. I mean, I want to see that movie or a TV. I would be first in line to see that. So what happened?
Well, they hired a wonderful screenwriter, Stephen Gaghan, who had got an Oscar for his film Traffic, and he'd wrote and directed Syriana with George Clooney, which is another great and very complex film. I think it had 4 storylines interwoven in a complex way. And in the original script, he told me, I think it had about 8. And anyone who's seen Syriana, it's still a very complicated film, a very clever piece of storytelling. But he was top, and they decided to have a cerebral screenwriter and a popcorn director. They got this chap called McGee to direct it, and he had done things like Terminator 4 and various other movies, and he was he had a good yes, he was going to bring a certain amount of, going to make sure the action and because this spy thriller I'd written, Dead by Running, I'd sold it originally with a blurb, which is another good idea to try and bear in mind how you describe your book when you're trying to sell it. And I described it as John le Carré meets Jason Bourne, to give that idea of a slightly more, hopefully slightly more upmarket, a bit more erudite sort of spin on the espionage world, but not holding back on the a strong driving plot and action. So that was considered to be quite. Warner Brothers responded to that and got this mixture of a intelligent screenwriter with a no holds barred, shameless action movie director, and that all sounded great. But they just, Warner Brothers weren't happy with the ending that came up, and we struggled with the ending for quite a long while. Other writers were brought in. An ending specialist was brought in. Really? Jamie Moss, who did Planet of the Apes, he was brought in just to sort out the final act, and then we had this awful thing, because the book opens with a runner running at the London Marathon. Unfortunately, he's got a suicide belt around his midriff, and he's his pace is not allowed to drop below 8 minutes a mile. And if it does, the bomb will go off, and if he deviates off the course, it will go off. So it's being calibrated with GPS, and it's a pretty scary opening. I'd done the London Marathon a couple of years earlier, and then of course we had the Boston Marathon disaster, where a bomb did go off in the Boston Marathon, and that kind of made Warner Brothers understandably very nervous and not wanting to upset people. But in that wonderful way film people do, they just said, "Great, let's just change the opening to the Tour de France." Just the Tour de France.
Just like that.
Just like that. What's the problem? Yeah. Anyway, so then at that stage, they decided to try a whole new team, and they got Adam Wingard, who did Kong versus Godzilla recently, as to direct, and he had a background in horror movies. He'd done things like The Guest and lots of VHS sort of found footage movies and things. Yeah. He came in with his writing partner Simon Barrett, and they were told to rewrite the whole thing, ignore the original script, rewrite the whole thing. So they had to go kind of reinventing the wheel. And then in the end, they said, well, I think we quite like bits of the Gaghan script as well, and bits of this. And, you were heading fast towards a camel rather than a horse, I'm afraid. So, because there were just too many people involved, very well-meaning, very talented people. And it wasn't anyone's fault. It was just one of those things. So the options have lapsed. Funny enough, last year, my film agent suddenly got this whole new approach from a British company wanting to do, there's a lot of spy stuff out there at the moment. Particularly things like Mick Herron's Slough House, which is great, and he's been very supportive actually. And he said, you never know when it took a long while for his books to catch on, and so who knows? It's out there, and if you do look at the sizzle reels, please don't share them on social media. Just have a look, because the copyright. I imagine the copyright issues are
it's a minefield. Yes,
I think it's all right just being on there as an example of what the film would look like. But I hadn't ever come across sizzle reels, but. Of course, whenever I'm feeling, every now and then I get it out of the box. I think and have a little look at it and put the lid shut again. But I would say, if anyone ever is lucky enough to, I'm sure you would agree with this, Mark, get lucky enough to have your film optioned, don't put that into your predictions financially for what.
No.
It's a bonus. It's a wonderful bonus if it happens. Yeah. And I've had a bit of interest in some of my more recent stuff. And my wife and I just say, if it happens, great, but keep it in a box and just try and ignore it. And it's a wonderful thing, and it can obviously help book sales enormously. If it's a complete turkey, it can have another effect. But it's not something you should factor into. It's purely a bonus if it comes off. And I don't have any. I really enjoyed a lot of the aspects of my ride with Dead Spy Running, and meeting some, when Steve Gaghan first read the book and I had that first meeting with him, he'd read that book so closely. Right. He knew far more about it than me. He was asking me things, such a forensic understanding of the book and the motivations of the character. And he latched straight away onto this son trying to clear his father's name. That in Hollywood was what it was all about. It was a son trying to clear his father's name who'd been accused of being a spy. And I learned a lot from the experience. And I do keep in touch with various people involved with it, and who knows, one day.
Wonderful. Fingers crossed. 2017, you published Find Me, which is the first JS Monroe thriller. So tell us about relaunching with a pseudonym. And it was a smash hit, and then after that, I think you have a book a year almost pretty much a book a year for the next few years.
Yeah.
That momentum, that reinvention, tell us about that and what effect it's had in your career.
So I wrote two more. In that story, when Jean-Claude Nesbitt became my agent, Claire Conrad Paston very cleverly sold a trilogy. The problem was I didn't have any other ideas at the time. She said, "Well, don't worry, come up with a proposal for book 2 and book 3." So I came up with a detailed proposal for book 2, and I couldn't. All I said for book 3 was China, I think. Anyway, HarperCollins were happy. So I wrote the 2 next books. I don't think they bore much resemblance to the proposal, but they took the story on. So it is a trilogy of spy books. And then I, life gets in the way again. We had to keep going on the work and with a young family and things who were growing up. And I left it for a bit. I finished the 3rd book in, I think, 2012. And I'd left the Telegraph, and I had to go back again to get my old job back. Because the film hadn't been made, and got a lot of ribbing from that. Everyone thought I'd moved to Hollywood, But when the money ran out, I went back to the day job. And again, on the train, I started writing. I wanted to write something different. I felt I'd done enough. I said what I wanted to say in terms of espionage. And there was a big trend, sort of 2000, I don't know, you can't exactly when to start, pinpoint the start, but with dark psychological thrillers. And I felt there was a lot more there, and without being too beating about the bush, a much wider audience than espionage. Espionage tends to be quite a male readership. Psychological thrillers, probably 90% female, my publishers reckon. And I decided to roll the dice again, and I changed my name, not a secret, although it was a secret when we sent the manuscript out, and had a gender-neutral name, JS Monroe, because, again, it felt if I had a male name writing for predominantly female audience, I wasn't sure. I think the jury's still out, but it was considered to be maybe a strategic thing to do. And it's amazing how many authors use initials now, and how many authors' initials include the word J. You've got J.K. Rowling, S.J. Watson, J.S. Monroe. There's an awful lot. J.P. Delaney. There's a huge number. Something about J which works. And J.S. obviously, my real name is Jon Stock, so J.S. Monroe worked well, and Monroe was my wife's mother's maiden name. So it's good to keep the mother-in-law on side. So I did all that. and I wrote Find Me. And we had this kind of weird experience where we managed to get overseas publishers buying it before we could sell it in the UK.
Right.
So we sold it to America. The best deal I've ever done was to Random House in Germany. They bought 2. They just bought the one on a 1-book deal, and then, and we ended up selling it to. It was now sold in 14 countries, but it was about, I think we sold 3 overseas territories before we sold it to a UK publisher, and that luckily was Headed Zeus, who've been brilliant, who are now part of Bloomsbury. In those days, they were an independent, quite a small independent publisher, punching well above their weight, and they've been very supportive. And Find Me. I think another thing I've learned about Find Me, which is probably still the best selling of all the JS Monroe ones, is it's also the most Marmite. And I think that I'm trying to work out what that really says, is that you should never ever, not that I have done, but I think that one was just written. I didn't have a publisher. I wrote it and then I sent it off. I just wrote the book I wanted to write, the book I wanted to read. I think that's the other key thing. You have to write books which you want to read. And it divided people. And, I got a lot of 5 stars and I got a lot of 1-star reviews. And my publisher very early on said, that is a very good sign. If you get all the kind of meh 3 stars, that's all right, but it doesn't mean anything. You're not having a reaction. And I do collect, when I'm giving talks, I do collect the odd review. And my favorite 1-star was, as I write this review, my copy of Find Me is in flames in the wood-burning stove.
Wow.
Which is kind of, I see it as a badge of honor now. It's sort of book burning, really, wasn't it? And that's quite an expression. She just said it was too strong a meat for her. It was a very, very thoughtful review. She just said it was just too strong, too dark. And it is a dark book. And a lot of my wife keeps saying, why don't you write a nice book? And then we meet someone who says, oh no, I love dark. It's amazing so it does divide people. And it was one of those books where it has a sort of a bait and switch sort of technique in the middle, which was sort of again, people have always commented on that. You think the book's been going in one direction and it switches to another. Students are disappearing from top universities. You think they're being siphoned off in some covert intelligence program, picking off, and their suicides are being faked and they're being taken off to something. It sounds that sort of book. And that was a residue of my time writing espionage. And my agent, Will Francis at Janklow, took over and became my agent. He said, why don't you just take it in a different direction? Make people think it's going to be a spy book and then take it in a totally different direction. Make it come out of something to do with his character and his family. So it switches course halfway through. And it's pretty, in retrospect, it is very dark, but it makes it and that's what people have always, the people who like the book, they like that they think it's not just a misdirection, it's a fundamental pulling the rug from under your feet, and it didn't happen in some crafty thing. This is what I'm going to do. It happened after I sent Will, my current agent, the first 30,000 words. He said, this is great, I'm enjoying this. It's a bit like the other stuff you've done. Why didn't you just take it a different direction? And it was such good advice, but it wasn't, in retrospect, it wasn't a creative moment of genius. It was just a suggestion, from my agent. I thought, that's an interesting idea. I'm eternally grateful to him because it went on to really launch the JS Monroe books, So I think taking advice from people is great. Don't be too proud to take advice from people. And sometimes these things happen, the things that people like happen almost by accident rather than careful planning,
Yeah. Going back to that 1-star review thing, I think it was, I heard Mark Kermode talking recently that he met Lars von Trier and told him that he loathed one of his films. He really, really hated one of his films. And von Trier said to him, that's great, because if you said, I thought it was okay, I would have been offended. That would be the worst reaction. If people either love it or hate it, that's at least you've inspired something in someone.
You've got a reaction, haven't you?
Exactly.
You've got a reaction, yeah. And I'm not saying it was, it was all like that, but it's I think it's going back to that thing of the initial, when I sent out those 25,000 words of Dead Spy Running, one agent saying, I don't love it enough.
Yes.
i.e. I don't like it. And one agent saying, I love every word. Send me more. It is. That's why we are in this business. And please, let's not try and prevent these algorithms coming up with the ability to write bestsellers, because it's a weird alchemy that goes on. We don't know what makes a bestseller. There is no formula. You can analyze bestsellers, but ultimately there is still that mysterious element of alchemy which we don't know. Why, and that's what makes it so exciting that we always it's always the next one, isn't it?
We've been doing this podcast for 6 years. We still haven't found it, and I don't think we will. And I kind of hope that we don't. Let's change the subject a bit, because you've been on the committee of the Marlborough Literary Festival, and one of the things that you've been involved with is live streaming the festival. And I've been seeing conversations online recently about book events and festivals where during lockdown or just post-lockdown, where people, may be vulnerable or can't make the festival, they were able to pay and watch the festival online. And that seems to be something that might be falling by the wayside, but you seem to have kept it going. And there's this ongoing sort of debate about accessibility and the expense and what have you.
Well, we sort of did. What happened in 2019, we had our best ever festival. We had amazing turnout in Marlborough in Wiltshire. We only have kind of the main town hall venue, the church hall, and the wonderful White Horse bookshop on the high street in Marlborough. Those are our three main venues. So 200-seater, 85-seater, and a kind of 50-seater. And we do a lot of events over sort of 3 or 4 days. And of course, that wasn't live stream. That's pre-COVID. And then 2020, we had to make the really sad decision to not do a festival at all. And 2021, we weren't sure how people would feel. I mean, quite a lot of our regular festival goers were slightly older demographic, I guess, and we thought they'd be more nervous. So we did a hybrid festival in 2021 where people could come in, but we live streamed it. And we went top end and got it cost a lot of money, a very good production company to live stream these things, and people could pay for live streaming tickets to watch it live and have a week afterwards to watch it. And we got quite a lot of people coming in. We couldn't do the same numbers because of social distancing, so we couldn't get 200 into town hall. We had to sort of separate people out. Probably got about half that. Online went well. What was really nice was that we had a record of it, a legacy of the festival, and we were able to do a nice legacy highlights reel afterwards, which was great. But actually, last October 2022, we actually decided not to live stream anything.
Right.
We took a decision to stop live streaming it because we felt people really did miss that coming in, and it was a bit of a punt, but it worked, and we got up to within a couple of % of the same box office sales that we did in 2019. So we kind of feel we're back to where we were. It was really interesting, the live streaming. It was a very stressful and time consuming, and you had to have a double backup broadband. You had to we had to have two special separate accounts for the routers and things with BT Business and things. And it was all, we had to back up, combine mobile phone signal, all sorts of things. At one point we were going to strap a satellite onto the town hall roof and a satellite dish, and it was all getting very, very elaborate. But I'm glad we did it, and we always know we could do that again if, God forbid, we went back to that situation. But you know what? I think we're one of the festivals now that has definitely decided to carry on without, just to get everyone in there, and we went back to the full number of events, and our ticket sales went really well. And it hasn't always been the case. A lot of smaller festivals have struggled. We've always punched a bit above our weight, but it was a massive gamble not doing anything this time and hoping people would turn up. But people did, people just want to get on with it. And we obviously took lots of measures and things, but we didn't have to restrict the number of people in the same way. And it was great to have that, get back to pre-COVID levels.
That's really interesting. For our 6th anniversary episode, we live streamed it and we beamed in my co-presenter from Canada. And the guy running it was an experienced guy who worked in television and film, and it nearly broke him. The poor guy. It pushed us all to the limit. We pulled it off, but yeah, it was a fun experience. But anyway, Jon, what's coming next from you? What can we expect from JS Monroe?
Well, I've got the No Place to Hide is the next JS Monroe. I'm writing this. I've just signed a deal with Little Brown, with the Bridge Street Press, which is an imprint of Little Brown, to do a non-fiction book called The Sleep Room. And it's kind of it's a kind of emerged out of my desire to do a lot of real world research into the dark world of psychiatry and big pharma, particularly in the 1950s and 60s. And it's about this controversial psychiatrist called William Sargent, who ran the psychiatric unit at St Thomas's Hospital from 1948 when the NHS was founded to 1972 when he retired, and he based himself at the Royal Waterloo, opposite the IMAX Centre in Waterloo, which became part of St Thomas's in 1948. And on the top floor, Ward 5, he had this narcosis room, which was the last chance saloon for people before they were lobotomized. And he gave them, put them into a deep sleep for between 3 and up to one case 5 months, woke them up 2 or 3 times a week to give them electric shock therapy. Sedated them with a very, very strong cocktail of tranquilizers and barbiturates and narcoleptic drugs. And they were taken every now and then. They were woken by the Nightingale nurses and taken to the bathroom or to be fed, but they weren't really conscious. They were sort of stumbling because they were so heavily sedated. And a lot of survivors are coming forward now and saying, what the hell was all that about?
Yeah.
And the sergeant was a very interesting guy. He also had very close connections with the intelligence services, and he'd done a lot of work in the war, sorting out people from Dunkirk at an army hospital, Belmont, which was turned into an army hospital. And so his connections were strong with Porton Down. He was. I've got all sorts of freedom of information requests going into Porton Down at the moment about this guy, and there's a slight whiff of that. What some of the things he was doing at the Royal Waterloo might have been funded by the intelligence services. I haven't managed to prove that yet. There's an awful lot of mad conspiracy theories out there. I'm sure you all know what's the rabbit holes you can go down. So I'm having to be very strict and get everything very, very tough criteria to what's going to go in the book. But it is throwing up some really interesting stuff. He definitely had good connections with MI5 and MI6. I don't think he was on their payroll, but he was called in to check the sanity of Soviet defectors, for instance. But similarly, at the same time he was doing this, the sleep room, this continuous narcosis treatment, as it was called, this was going on in America, funded by the CIA at a hospital in Montreal, just across the border in Canada. And it was also going on in Australia. And both in Canada and in Australia, a lot of compensation is being now given to patients, but here, nothing. Complete stonewalling. And so I'm investigating the whole thing. There's been a huge amount of research. I've been down at Kew at the National Archives. I've been living at the Wellcome collection. going through all their medical archives, all private papers of William Sargent, which has been really fascinating, and it's throwing out a lot of interesting stuff. And I'm having to deal with some, in the thrill of the chase, you suddenly realise I got a call this morning from someone who went in there twice in the 64 and 72, 71, and very fragile still.
Yeah,
and I'm doing an interview with them this afternoon, and they want their story to be told, but they haven't even told their children, or in this case, second husband, that they were in a psychiatric unit when they were in their late teens. And
wow.
this unit was mainly for people from the age of 15 to 25, and predominantly young women. It's not all the case; there were older people there as well, but it was predominantly young women who were sent there and put to sleep for this time and given these huge numbers of shocks, 30, 40 electric shocks. So I'm having to be very, very careful that I have to remember the real people involved here who are still alive, and I'm trying to record their stories before it's too late, really. And it's proving the most. I don't think I've been as excited as this for a very long time, because it's real world research, but I feel like it's something. I'm telling a story that needs to be told.
Wow, that sounds extraordinary. Well, until then, folks, you've got no place to hide, and an incredible backlist from Jon. Jon Monroe, thank you. Jon Stock, rather, or JS Monroe. Thank you so much for speaking to me today. Hope to speak to you again soon.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Cheers.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Mark, there's so much to unpack in this interview, but we're going to do an extended version after the podcast. Yeah. But let's just quickly talk about this idea of the I want to call it the train novel, because this keeps coming up, and it started with you. It started with you telling the story about how you wrote books on the train commuting to work. I
didn't invent it, but
I know, but you kind of popularized it. But the thing that I think is really fascinating is, here's another example of someone who fit a book around their busy life. That they had to get on a train, they had to go to work, and rather than just sit there and read the paper, or sit there and Wordle, which would be fun, I must admit, or sit there and look out the window, or sleep. A lot of people like to do that on trains. He wrote a book, and it got me thinking. Just like we've had code names, if you like, on this podcast for people that support you. Find your Julie. Okay,
Find your Julie,
for anyone, for long-term listeners, you'll understand what that is. If you don't know what that is, listen back to some of the podcasts, and you'll get the vibe of that. But I want to introduce a new phrase into the lexicon of the bestseller experiment, and I want to call it the train novel.
Yeah.
The train novel represents something that's been written not just on a train, but it's been written whilst you're waiting around or whilst you're doing other things. And I think it's really important for people to grasp this idea that if you've got a busy life, you can still write a book. There is still time in your day.
How many people have we spoken to that have written in doctors' waiting rooms or waiting for a haircut while being on a bus? I remember our gingerbread episode. It's a single parent writing on a bus. Simon Scarrow wrote most of his first novel, I think, on a train, and for commuters like his father. And then Jon in this interview. I did so much writing on my commute into London. It was a gift. It was kind of, I realized it was a slice of the day. And before that, when I was a sales rep driving around the country, I'd write in lay-bys. I'd pull over, have my lunch, and then get the pad out or the laptop and just start writing in a lay-by. And then before that, when I was on the night shift at Waterstones in Wimbledon, where if you got 2 customers in an evening, you were lucky. I was there till 9 o'clock at night, and I'd be writing on the shift there. Wrote my first play that way. So it's finding those little spaces, those little slices of emptiness in the day, where you normally you could be staring out of a window. And let's not underestimate the power of staring out of a window. That is part of the writing process, people.
Yeah.
But, frankly, it's a lot more productive to get words on the page. So, the train novel, it's a thing. It's definitely a thing.
It's definitely a thing. So as part of the fun and games of this, we know there's a ton of other places that you write your books, and we want to know what they are. Are you like one of our Academy members who writes, for 10 minutes whilst they're waiting for their kids to come out of their classroom at school?
Yeah.
And again, I want to stress as well, it's not just about writing, it's also about thinking about your novel. And so, because that's part of the writing process, but we have to we think about thinking about our novel. It's like we have to almost schedule time to think about our novel if we're not doing it naturally. What I have noticed is when people are really into their books, and everyone will understand this, is if they're really into it, they can't stop thinking about their book. They're thinking, there's someone's chatting with them and they're like, oh, sorry, I was just miles away trying to work out how to finish that chapter. Right? I know that happens. But when we get to that place, it's great because then the momentum's with us. But I think for most writers, getting that momentum is probably one of the biggest, hardest struggles, is getting enough writing in the day to get that flow.
That staring into space moment, that's where having a Julie really makes it. And for listeners, go back and listen to the Angela Marsons episode. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to find out what this Julie thing is all about, because it's having a supportive partner. And that doesn't mean someone who, sacrifices everything so you can write your novel. It can mean just someone who understands that when you're staring into empty space and you're in the middle of a draft, that means you probably shouldn't be disturbed because you'll think, or just understanding that when the door is shut, or if you're on the train, or if you have just that 20 minutes in the evening or first thing in the morning, they understand that, that's the time when you shouldn't be disturbed. Having someone like that is, it's just essential. It just makes such a difference.
So where do you write your train novel? Drop us a note, come to the Contact Us page on the website, bestsellerexperiment.com. Let us know, come onto socials, Twitter, Facebook, wherever. Just let us know. We want to kind of start compiling a list because firstly, it's going to be brilliant. I know we're going to get some really obscure stuff out there. But, I think that we want to encourage people, the majority of people I think who are out there struggling to write their book because they say, I don't have the time. I can't find the time in the day. And, this keeps coming up. So we really want to campaign and we want to champion this on this podcast because we think everyone can write a book, even with the most insane kind of schedules. And also, to be honest, folks, if you've got an insane schedule, and who doesn't, to be honest, nowadays, it's even more important to find that space and to snatch that 5 minutes for yourself, because that's the thing that will keep your battery filled. It's the thing that will keep you going through the hard stuff that you might be dealing with, the parenting challenges or the troubles at work or just the stress or health issues, whatever it might be for you. That little bit of writing, it's like your meditation for the day, really. I really do think there's a potential link there. So we're going to champion this the rest of this year. We're going to champion this, but we want to know, where do you write? How do you do it? Let's inspire other people who thought, I never thought I could write there.
Yeah.
So brilliant. Now, folks, this is a very, as you know, a brilliantly in-depth interview, but very long. So we are going to do the rest of our discussions around this in the extended. And man, is there a lot of stuff we're going to be talking about, folks. If you're interested in any of the following, you must join us on the extended. We're going to talk about never assuming reader knowledge. We're going to talk about research and the plumbing and wiring. Absolutely brilliant analogy. We're going to talk about composite characters. This is huge, really important to think about. We're going to talk about this idea of getting in late and out early in scenes. We're going to delve into the unique book launches and how it doesn't have to be extravagant, but if it's unique, it will get the attention of the press and people that might want to come. We're going to talk about milestones, book deals and sizzle reels. We're going to also talk about self-belief and submissions, because this is a very important thing for where a lot of people fall down and you get rejections and you kind of feel bad and give up. But as JS Monroe taught us, wow, if you've got that self-belief to keep going, good things can happen. We're going to delve very quickly into ending consultants, because that's something I've never come across. I love that. We're going to talk about the film options as well, which is something Mark knows a little bit about, and what we're going to call the Marmite novel, this idea of 1 stars and 5 stars are actually better than 3 stars. And finally, writing the book that you want to write and read. So folks, if any of that interests you, then do join us on the Extended. Just sign up, become a patron. It's a coffee a month. I know everyone says that and it's really corny, but it's true. Do come and support us on the podcast and get all of the extra bonuses, and we'll see you on the other side. So welcome to the Extended podcast, folks. Lots to get through today. Mark, the very first thing that really jumped out for me was when JS Monroe said, never underestimate the intelligence of your reader, but never assume knowledge. I think every single writer should have that on their wall.
Well, it's a really, really fine line, because you don't want to be patronizing your readers, and particularly if you're writing in the world that might be a little bit unfamiliar to them, So, in cop thrillers or spy thrillers, there might be all sorts of acronyms or terms of knowledge that might be unfamiliar. But I think if they have some sort of context around them, the reader can add 2 + 2 and figure out what they are, But again, you can't always assume that they're going to know everything. And this is where big generational gaps come in as well. You talk to some people about certain kind of TV shows or cultural figures that are, because we're the same generation, we know who, I don't know, Dame Edna Everage is. We'll talk about, and then you mention it to someone outside of the UK or someone who, a kid, a Gen Z or something, they'll just give you a completely blank stare. I remember when I was a sales rep, we did a book about the comedian Frankie Howard. Okay. So I guarantee people listen to this, some will just do what you did and go, oh yeah, Frankie Howard, love Frankie Howard. And then some people go, nope, no clue. Exactly. And so it was one of those books where, as a bookseller, as a rep, I'm going from store to store and I'm going through my list, and you got all the titles, and you go to people, oh, we got a biography about Frankie Howard. And every bookseller went, oh, brilliant, I know who he is. I didn't have to sell it. I just said, that's it. And then I came to a bookseller who was younger and wasn't born or grew up in the UK. And she said, I have no idea who that is. So I was completely thrown, because I had to sell this book for the first time, and I had to think, how much does she need to know? Does she just need to know that he was a big cultural figure? Is she going to take that on trust? So, and the same thing happens in a novel. There will be things that you discuss that you just think, well, everyone knows that, don't they? And they won't. So this is where beta readers are absolutely essential, and which is why you should have beta readers outside of your age group and outside of your usual kind of,
and genre as well, because again, I think genre specific readers, know some of the things about the genre. I think there's a really good example of this that I've experienced just with music, and anyone can do this. Find somebody that lives in a different country and talk about some of your favorite bands from when you were a child, and you will be blown away, firstly, by the most obscure bands that did make it across the Atlantic to say North American. Like, what, really? Were they well known here as well? And then some of these huge multi-million selling artists that you used to be into as a kid, in my case in the UK, that someone in Canada has never heard of. I'm like, how could you not know? And it just, this is a constant conversation I have. I've been here 10 plus years now, and I constantly find, like, almost monthly, a new artist that was either hugely famous here, which surprised me, or someone was massively famous and they've never heard of. And that's the kind of reminder, the check-in that we have to realize. But we have to think about it consciously when we're writing, especially if you're writing series, because you can't assume someone's read the first book.
That's true. But also, I mean, when we wrote Back to Reality, you'll remember the conversations we had about Colin the Caterpillar Cake, Marks and Spencer's, all these British things that British readers will go, got that, love it. It's an immediate cultural touchstone that they buy into straight away. But outside of the UK, it needs a little explaining. So we would either slip in a line that kind of explained it, or we had a glossary at the back. Do you remember? We've got a glossary at the back that explains. And
you know what's funny is the other day I went to see a British play at a Canadian local theatre here, and they had a glossary of English phrases in the back. And I thought, this is brilliant. And one of them was brilliant. One of them actually said, it actually defined what taking the piss meant. And I was like, they actually had to explain that, and then they even went to things like, like we did Colin the Caterpillar Cake. They had like, certain types of sweets, or candy as they call them over here, to explain what they were. And again, I think it's I loved it. I thought it was, I mean, I find that I find language and, you know, obviously when you live in a different country to where you're born, you're exposed to it so much more. But, you know, your readers, folks, are going to pick up your book and you do not know where they are living. They could be in India, they could be in Australia, they could be in Scandinavia, in North America. And I mean, that's the one guarantee that you have is if you publish a book out there, whether it's self-published or traditionally published, you're going to get, your books are going to travel around the world. They're going to be picked up in, you know, in airports and dropped off in airports. And so you've got to assume that you've got this international audience.
But these things come in degrees as well. So with Jon's book, you know, things like the Faustian pact, I know what that is. You might know what that is. Not everyone will. So you all have to have a moment in your story where someone explains what that is, because it is so pivotal to the story that if you don't know what that is, the reader is lost immediately. So you need a moment whereas explaining what a particular brand of chocolate cake is, you know, or a you know, some kind of cultural reference, you can either hope that it makes sense in context and move on, or just slip a tiny bit of explanation. I mean, I grew up reading, and the thing is, this does seem to be something. We've got an interview coming up with a British author in a few weeks who had to make all sorts of changes for her American publisher, you know, pavement to sidewalk, things like that, you know. And there was a part of me thinking, but I grew up ingesting all of this kind of American culture, and no one did that for me. No one changed it for us. You know, we were expected to kind of keep up and make sense of it, you know. So I remember, because I grew up reading Mad magazine, and I had to go to my dad, and because there were all these jokes about Spiro Agnew, who was Richard Nixon's vice president. And I had to go to my dad and say, who's Spiro Agnew? And he explained. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense now. Those jokes make sense now. So, you know, it is something that sometimes it can go a bit too far, maybe.
Yeah, but I'd rather have the glossary, and keep the context as in it, because I think that's what makes it interesting in many ways. I mean, you might lose a bit of the culture if you try to kind of convert it too much so that everyone understands every single word in it. But like,
and if you've got a story where you do have those strange terms, you know, technical terms or whatever, you don't end up having characters who should both know the same thing explaining stuff to each other. As you know, the FBI investigates, you know, crimes. It's like you don't want two FBI agents telling that to each other. But, you know, if you can have a situation where you have someone who doesn't know what's going on and then can have that briefly explained to them, then that works. That should be okay. Yeah.
Brilliant. Now, this is probably the best definition I've heard of research since we started this podcast. I'm going to give this an official award because it's so brilliant and so obvious, but so it just, and so what Jon said is, he said that research is the plumbing and wiring of writing a book. And I know when you heard that, you went, oh, and for me, it was instantly, it's the behind the scenes, the hidden stuff, but it makes everything work.
Yeah.
You don't have to show it, but it makes everything work. And that for me is why it's such a brilliant reminder to think, you know, and then the alternative, you know, when you go into a house that's being renovated and everything's opened up and you've got all the wires hanging out, but it looks ugly, doesn't it? And so it's a reminder as well that if you do that with all your research, you're going to have this novel that's just cluttered and not very clear. And so this is a great analogy, I think, and something that we should remember if we are heavy researchers, which I think I think we tend to be as writers. I think that's part of the reason we do it. Is we're fascinated by the world. We're fascinated by people, events, characters.
But you don't want the author, like you say, you don't want the reader seeing all the wires. You just want them to see a light switch or a tap or a faucet, as Americans would say. Yes. You know, you just want the, you know, to highlight certain parts of it. So yeah, it's a fine art getting that right. But yeah, it's and again, it sort of comes back to that. Never underestimate your reader's intelligence. Give them enough to add 2 + 2, and then they'll be more engaged. That will always make a big difference.
Absolutely. Now, when Jon talked about this idea of composite characters, we've talked a lot about, you know, base a character on somebody that you know, but I love this idea where you take elements. Anyone who's ever played that game, Guess Who?
Guess Who? Yes.
It's almost like the reverse of that, isn't it? You're trying to work out the character by asking, do they wear glasses? And that. But I love this idea of taking a group of people that you know and taking elements of each and mixing them together to create something completely unique and hopefully unidentifiable by any one of the individuals that you've picked. Because I think that's a genius way of getting around the problem of exposing somebody's flaw, that but at the same time, it's always about the elements of people that you're writing about anyway, isn't it? I mean, there's certain things about a character that someone that won't fit into your character, but it's the specific aspect of their personality you're writing about, which is why the composite side of things is just a brilliant way of bringing that person a unique character to life.
Yeah, I mean, as an author, you need to have your kind of character radar on all the time. So if you're sitting on the train and you hear someone come up with a certain turn of phrase, or you're walking down the street or in the pub and you hear something, if you're like me, you'll hear something and go, that is going in a book. Or you see a certain kind of behavior, you think, yeah, I'm doing that. I know, and we all recognize. And it starts with types, stereotypes, the builder who, you get builder's bum and, they give you their political opinions or whatever. That's a stereotype. So take that stereotype, take that character that we know, but give them a little interesting twist as well. Make them a composite. Maybe they're into poetry or something like that. Give them something really unexpected. So you go, oh, okay, I thought I knew what this was going to be, but actually there's a little bit of spice in there. And I think that's what that composite character thing can be as well, where you take something that we think we understand and give it a little extra zing and make it a little bit interesting. And I think that's always a delight for the reader. I mean, I've always seen my mission as to delight the reader, to present them something they think they know and either subvert it or add a little something extra.
Yeah, and for anyone who's interested in this idea of composition, we, as a musician, there's a great analogy. And what I do when I'm recording a vocalist is I never ask them just to sing the song through or sing the chorus once. I get them to sing. We put it on a loop, actually, and I say, right, we'll just loop this chorus and I'm going to ask you to record it 10 times over.
Wow, right.
And then what happens is there's actually a feature in my music software which basically layers every single recording one after the other. And what you end up is a block of 10 recordings. And then as a producer, and this is a very common thing, but nobody really understands how this works if you've not done it. As a producer, what I do is I go through literally word by word.
And pick the best one.
And I pick the best word because sometimes it's a bit breathy, sometimes it's slightly off, tuning wise. And what you do is you create what we call a composite vocal. And I promise you folks, as proof that this works, every single time somebody does that as a producer, you always end up with the very best vocal. And no one knows that it's all these little syllables and words and breaths all glued together into one beautifully perfect line. And that's what happens when you get your 5 characters and you pull them together and you take, characteristic A of your first person, characteristic B of your second, and you pull them into you always end up with a much more interesting character. And proof is in how we work with vocals in the studio. And every producer does that. And it's actually a technique, vocal composition, composite vocals is what it was called. And every singers, it's like their bane of their life. Oh God, I've got to sing it. They come out the studio at the end of the day, they're done with the song. They never want to hear it again because they've had to repeat it so many times. But that really struck me when I heard the word composite. I thought, that's something I already know about in music. Right. So yeah, very interesting, very interesting. Let's talk about in late, out early. This, I knew that there was a technique, don't start and give all the lead up to get into the action. But I didn't hear this other part of it out early. I love that. It's like just squeeze the two ends and give them the meat. But that's a great reminder, isn't it, to readers when to writers when they're doing, say, action scenes or anything really within their book. It's
a really good principle to stick to, and it's most helpful when you're editing as well, because you will you'll write a scene and it will have a natural beginning, middle, and an end. But when you come to editing and you're looking for places to cut, how late can you come into the scene? How early can you get out? It's something Jon came up with a really interesting quote. He said, there's more craft than art in writing scripts, which I thought was a really interesting point to make, which is, I think is absolutely true, because when you're putting together a screenplay, it is much more a collection of scenes than perhaps a novel is. A novel, it's not just structure in a novel. You're also thinking about the style, the prose style. You're thinking about, all of those little flourishes and touches that we love in a novel. Whereas a screenplay generally is a set of instructions. It's like a big IKEA thing for the director and the cast and crew. And they go, oh, okay, we're going to make a movie out of this set of instructions, So, but I think it's something that novelists, we can definitely learn from. This idea of, coming as late as possible, get out early, because don't bore us, get to the chorus. Don't have a load of, if you got two characters meeting in a cafe and one has to tell the other, some crucial piece of news. Yes, you can have a bit of preamble, but only if it works as a tension builder. If you have them coming in saying, oh, what table should we go? There's a table over there. Shall we go and sit in the corner? Actually, that's too near the loos. I'll get a smell. Can we sit over there by the window? Oh, I'm not sure. It's a bit bright. No, that's boring. You open the scene with them sitting in a booth. You don't have all that preamble. It's, get to the meat of it as soon as you can.
But it's also about getting out as quick as possible. It's like if you think of that analogy of the chorus, if you kept repeating the chorus over and over and over again, that would get boring, wouldn't it? So it's like, give us the action and then get the hell out of there.
Yeah, once you've got that essential bit of information, once you've got, it might be some turnaround, it might be some piece of exposition, it might be some piece of news that needs to be delivered, then the reader wants to move on. Get on with it, cut. And it's quite a revelation when you realize that, because I came from theatre where it's more difficult to do that. Theatre tends to have longer scenes, longer set pieces. You tend to have people coming in, having a conversation, and it kind of works because the audience is in the room with them and there's a different kind of tension there. And they're willing to, it's almost like you're like a voyeur in the theatre. You're peering through the window at these characters and what's going on. Whereas with a novel or a film, it's kind of, come on, let's get on with it. Let's get on on and let's get on to the next thing as soon as possible. So that for me is kind of the key difference.
Yeah, fantastic. Now let's talk about the importance, not just of book launches, but unique book launches, because this is a freebie for every writer. Every writer that finishes a book has the option to do a book launch, and a lot of people don't do it because they think, oh, it's too much to organize, or it'll cost too much, or I don't want to, I think of a book launch just as an excuse to have a party, even if it's just getting some friends around who are just supportive of what you're doing. That can be your book launch. But I love the fact that JS Monroe took this to a whole new level. I mean, let's not just like go to our local bookstore, which is what we often encourage people. Go to your local bookstore and ask if you can do a book launch. He went to the top of Canary Wharf.
Which, to be fair, is beyond the reach of most of us. But let's put this in context. I think what he did was he took advantage of something unique, and we all have that. We might not know it. We spoke to, was it Kathy Bramley who had the book launch in the phone box? I think it was Kathy Bramley
in our local village, and invited the mayor to come along.
Invited the mayor. Snip the ribbon.
Snip a ribbon,
just last year, Julie Wassmer launched her new book at the lifeboat station in Whitstable. She raised money for the lifeboats while she did it, and it was packed because
you could tie it into like a charity event or something linked with the novel, right?
Absolutely. If you've got access to some kind of venue that is a bit unusual, people might just turn up just to see the venue. Oh, I don't normally get to see inside this place. It might be somewhere that you go every day that you take completely for granted. but they find it a bit interesting. Claire, Claire's a bell ringer, and once a year they have a tower open day where you can go up and see the bells. Yeah. It's like Disneyland. They're queuing around the block because people don't get to see it. It's one of these things that's like, shall we go? Yeah, I've never been. Let's have.
Give them a reason apart from just your book to actually show up, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So, think, is there somewhere local to you that is a bit different that might be willing to, host as a venue? And
one thing that made me think, I wonder if there's anyone's ever done a walking book launch. Like you do when you go to like London and you can do these tours, the Jack the Ripper tour and the Agatha Christie tour and even just the London double-decker tour. I mean, I find those fascinating. You always learn a little bit about the history. Now, if you set your book in a certain village or, and it can be like your local village, it doesn't have to be somewhere big on the map, but you probably know a lot more about that village than anyone who's not read your book. And you could actually do the tour, could be like, okay, it's walking tour for an hour. I'm going to, and then you get to certain locations. You could have 3 spots maybe that you'd say, I featured this in the novel and this is a bit of history. But whilst you're walking between places, what are you going to talk about? Well, you chat about your book, you Q&A it. Something like that could be brilliant. You could just go for a walk to launch your book. And at the end of it, you get to the place where you've got all your books there. You've got a bit of tea and coffee. It could be a local church hall. Everyone will be like, that was brilliant. They'll all buy your book because they'll just, reciprocity, right?
Yeah, you get the press along for sure as well.
Yeah,
I remember we used to do that sort of thing with booksellers. When I remember we had a book called The Phoenix, and I forget the name of the author, but it was non-fiction. It was about the rebuilding of London after the fire of 1666. And he took us and a bunch of booksellers all over London, started at Pudding Lane and then went to St. Paul's and, went to all these extraordinary places around London where the Great Fire, was affected. And we ended up at the monument, sort of circled back on ourselves. And I still remember that day now. It was, I learned so much. Yeah. And, I worked for the publisher, so I didn't have to buy the book. But, the booksellers were really, really engaged and they remembered it, and the book got all sorts of promotions off the back of it. So that sort of stuff does work.
It's just about being creative. It doesn't have to be about being a big event planner or having a lot of money to hire an extravagant venue. And actually, in the case of, Jon Monroe, he said that he got the top of the Canary Wharf when it was not even being used, and it cost him 250 quid, which is actually cheaper than hiring most hotels, like boardrooms, whatever, for an afternoon.
Well, isn't it? Oh no, it's the Shard, isn't it? I think the Shard, you pay 25 quid just to go to the top of it now.
I think it's brilliant. I think, okay, how about somebody does a book launch? It'd be fun. A book launch on the London Eye. You just all show up at a certain time. You get in a little pod,
one of the pods.
And then you got an hour. Yeah,
I mean, what? I think someone has done that.
Probably
actually.
Done it. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's just about being. I mean, let's be honest. To be a writer, you've got to be imaginative. So why don't we extend that to how we promote our books and make the most of the opportunities we've got? Little things like that can make all the difference in the launch as well.
Totally.
Absolutely huge.
As well. Yeah.
Brilliant. Let's talk about the importance of self-belief when you're on the submission train, when you're pushing your book to agents, or you're pushing your book to authors, or even you're just pushing your book to people on Amazon to buy yours in a self-published book. I think this idea of self-belief is so essential to keep you coming. And the thing that I loved that Jon and JS Monroe said was, he said, what kind of blew him away is that it's the same words that he's given agent number 1 to read that rejects his book. The exact same words go to agent number 2 who says, "This is brilliant. I love it. Let's do something."
I've got the quotes here. I've got the agent A said, "Don't quite love it enough." And agent B said, "I'm loving every single word." And if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know, about the submissions process and ultimately readers out there, you can't please everyone, but you will eventually please someone.
Yes. I think it's important to remember the 3 first letters of submission are also the 3 first letters of subjective.
It's very true.
So remember, folks, the game is not about whether you get rejected or accepted. The game of submissions is about finding that one person that believes in you. And some people find them very soon, and others, it takes a few people, it can take a lot of people to get to that person that believes in you. It doesn't matter. Once you find that person, it does not matter about any of the rejections you've had in the past. those evaporate instantly. Those become the letters that you get to show people when you're successful. What matters, all that matters, is the person that believes in you. But this is the crucial bit. For them to believe in you, you have to believe in yourself. Because the minute you no longer believe in yourself, then no one else will believe in you. That's what I believe. I believe that if you, and the reason I believe this is if you're talking to an agent and you've lost all the belief in your own abilities and you don't believe it's going to happen, the agent's going to pick that up. And what agent's going to want to represent someone that they think, well, this person doesn't really believe in their book. I didn't really get any kind of positive vibe that they're excited about what they're doing. So this is why the self-belief part is the bit you have to maintain. You can never, ever, you're allowed to doubt yourself. Absolutely, we all do. But don't ever let a rejection crush or crack your own self-belief. If you know that what you've done is good and you're proud of what you've done, then keep that intact. And if you keep that bit intact, that other person that you're looking for will show up at some point. And that's just part of the game. It's just like how many rejections do you get to say on the bestseller experiment you had when you come on to talk about your novel? Like, it becomes a bit of a like, well, I had 57. Oh, bloody hell, that's the most ever. Well done, And how many was it? 3 million book sales. That's amazing, right? That's how this works. Never, ever, ever question your self-belief. That you have to keep sacred and honor. But it is interesting. We hear it again and again, Mark, almost weekly, don't we, about the rejections people get. But they come on the podcast to tell the story that they kept going.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's once you learn to cope with that, then you can cope with the 1-star reviews and the snark and all the other stuff that comes with it.
It's training in some ways for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, Mark, I've never heard of an ending consultant. I knew there were audiences that film companies might get in to say, watch this film and then give us some feedback, and they might say, what do you think of the ending? Test screenings, right? Yeah. I'd never heard of this where there's actually somebody who's the consultant who will actually kind of like just talk about the ending and give you examples. This is the whole Hollywood culture of the script doctor, which
I don't know. It's one of these things that the film press call them script doctors, but people who work in films just call them screenwriters, and they just get someone in to work on it. And it may be that certain screenwriters have particular strengths. You certainly see it on the bigger budget Hollywood movies. A film like, say, Armageddon or whatever. I think that one got in particular trouble because it had so many credited screenwriters, and actually they couldn't list them all. So funny, I went to see Superman the movie the other night. Right, okay, 1978 it came out,
the original.
And there are WGA rules about how many writers you can credit on a film. And I think the most is 3, but what you get is 2 get a story credit and then 2 get a script credit. And if you have an ampersand, that means the pair have worked together, so that counts as 1 credit. There's all these weird things. But after all their names came up, the name Tom Mankiewicz came up as creative consultant. Now, I know because I've read Tom Mankiewicz's biography. He's one of my favorite screenwriters of the 70s and 80s. He worked on a ton of Bond movies, the Superman movies. He was the guy you brought in to write the final draft because he was brilliant. He would come in and do a final polish, and he was very funny and very witty. And William Goldman did a lot of the same stuff as well. So, you've got this culture of the script doctor, the people who come in and do what they call weeklies, and they work for a week at an extremely high rate of pay. And they come in and they fix your script. Sometimes, what happens is they will have a meeting with the director and the producers, and they'll say, we've got a problem with the script. And it's usually when it's about to go into production as well, because the train is already leaving the station. People are building sets. Actors are only available for so many weeks, so we got to fix this right now. And so they come in and they say, right, here's the problem, and this doesn't work, that doesn't work, and you need to fix it. And we think it's just the dialogue, or we think it's just the ending. So can you come in and fix it? So the writer comes in and tries to fix it, and they're a fresh pair of eyes. They haven't been worn out by the whole process, and they're being very highly paid to do it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So Now, what's interesting about this is Warner Brothers were developing this for 5 years and they spent $10 million on it and then walked away. So, and, you know, they had a director attached, McGee, but as far as I know, it never went into production. It was always in pre-production. But it's interesting. But I think, as John said at the end, just too many people were involved. You just ended up with too many cooks. And what you lose there is any kind of authorial voice, because films are developed in a very different way to novels. I mean, we go through rewrites and script. We'll get feedback and notes and what have you. But, you know, you've got the director who is seen by many to be the author of the film. You know, you got the French auteur theory, which is cobblers, frankly, but that's how it's seen. So the director is there driving the kind of the vision. But once you start getting all sorts of people coming and chipping in their 2 pence, that's kind of how bad films are made. They kind of lose their focus. And I think, you know, it's a shame John's film never got made, but he's got the rights back. He's got more interest in it. It'll probably, to be honest, it'd probably make a better Apple Plus or Netflix series than it will, you know, a movie, to be honest. So maybe he dodged a bullet.
Yeah, and for me, I think the big kind of takeaway for authors is it is important to get feedback on your beginnings and endings. And that's really, I mean, in the world of writing, that's where beta readers come in. And I think if there's one thing you're going to do, ask people to read the beginning of your book and ask them, would you read this? That's what we do in the academy. You know, we have this phrase, you know, I would read that. IWWT, right? It's like a code name. So I'll definitely read that. And then, I think it's important, you know, as a bare minimum, if you're going to do any kind of market testing, get people to read the beginning of your book and hopefully get them to read the whole thing so that they can give you feedback on the end and look in the same way that you have, you know, these test screenings. You've got to have a test reading and see. And the key thing is, are you hearing the same thing from different people? And that's where you have to start taking note. Everyone's going to have their own personal opinions, but if you start to see commonalities of everyone saying, the intro was great, but didn't really grab my attention to keep going. And if everyone's saying that, that's really valuable information. You don't want to be finding that out when you put the book out on Amazon or you're in your bookshop and it's not selling because people aren't recommending it. Now let's talk about the Marmite novel. This is a really good one, isn't it? We've talked about this before, but again, I love the fact that JS Monroe said, you know, you don't want 3 stars. You absolutely, like we always talk about, you don't want 1 stars. Well, it's actually the other way around, isn't it? We want, obviously, lots of 5 stars, but we also want 1 stars, not 3 stars, because 3 stars are sitting on the fence. You've not really, kind of mediocre, middle of the road, you know, it's all right. But a 1 star and a 5 star, you split your audience. The people that hate it, you know, obviously, you know, they're never going to like it anyway, but they're acting as a purpose and that they're balancing the people that are absolutely loving what you do and will tell everyone about it. And I don't think 3-starers go around shouting about novels to people, do they?
No, they don't. They don't. And this is why I took some solace in this, because this is what's happened with Unwelcome.
It's exactly what's happened with the film, hasn't it? I mean, it is literally black and white. It's either the best film people have seen or the people can't work out what's going on. Brilliant. Because actually, think about it from a mathematical perspective. Imagine you got 50% 5 stars for your book and 50% 1 stars. What's your average score? 3. What if you got 100% 3 stars? What's your average score? 3. Exactly the same number. Yeah. Now, how many people in the 1 and 5 stars are going to recommend your book? 50% of people. How many people in the 3-star 100% are going to recommend your book? No one. So this is the math.
This is the problem I have with Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, Amazon star ratings, because they just do this kind of mean average. And in the end, it doesn't really tell you anything.
They should weight the 5 stars a lot higher than 5, right? And they should reduce the 1 stars a lot lower. Because often the 1 stars can also be, and this is the thing we talked about before, you know, my book, I ordered this book last week.
Left in my neighbour's hedge.
It took an extra day to get here, 1 star. I mean, that's not fair on the author. But the point is that anyone that makes any kind of traction in the world are 5 stars and 1 stars. I mean, it's just, and we've always said this, let's bring up Donald Trump. We don't talk about him often on the podcast, but as an example of someone that absolutely splits his audience, and look at how much press he gets every single day. Yeah. It's because he's a 5-star and a 1-starer, right? A 3-star, no one's interested. So as an author, you've got to ask yourself, how can I be a 5-star author, but what can I do to get some 1 stars? And actually, it's almost like a strategy. I mean, let's call it what it is. Don't be sad at 1 stars. Obviously, if you're getting all 1 stars, there's a problem. There's a bigger issue at play. But if you're getting more 5 stars than 1 stars, you're winning. You're absolutely winning at writing, and keep doing that, because it will grow your career.
Well, the whole point of doing anything creative is it's an expression of yourself, but also it's to reach out to the end user, the person who reads it or listens to your music or watches your film. You want to provoke a reaction. And if the reaction is, yeah, it's all right, then, that's a year of your life, or however many, end the sales, or those, like we talked about, writing on the train, writing in spare minutes. And you don't want to go through all that just to get, yeah, it's all right. Yeah. That's the worst review ever.
That is the worst review. Yeah. I mean, you want people to be burning your book in a wood burning stove, don't you? Really? That was bonkers. Actually,
get banned from a Florida library. That's a goal in life.
But this again, designing your world as an author, designing what you want to do, have some fun with this. Because the thing is, if you can laugh about it and you have some fun, and you can say, yeah, I totally planned 1-star reviews. But in theory, like if you have actually planned that, it actually lightens the whole challenge. So many people take that so hard. Oh my gosh, I got my first 1-star review, or I keep getting 1-star reviews. It's like, if you flip it and you see that as part of your strategy, because it means that you are getting strong. This is really what it is, isn't it, Mark? You're getting a strong reaction.
Yeah. Totally.
A strong reaction is a strong reaction, 5-star. This is amazing, best book I've ever written. And a strong reaction is, I'm burning this book in my, because it was too strong for me. So what you actually want to get, what you want to get from your readers, whoever they are, is strong reactions, and that's where you get your 1 and your 5 stars, and that's all good.
And if you look at your cultural heroes throughout history, the Beatles albums were burned. It's everyone's upset. Someone at some point, and it's not that they went out to be provocative. No, but I think they spoke their truth, and that upsets people sometimes.
But it gives people a reason to. Yeah, I mean, I know this sounds ridiculous, but we've got this. We've been trying to raise $1.5 million to build a new track for the community and the kids, right? For 20 years we've been trying. And it's really hard to get people, everyone wants it, but no one's coming and going, here's a ton of money to make it happen. Now, yesterday, the council announced, we're talking about getting $700,000 from the local council, right? To be able to get this built. Not a huge amount of money when you're considering a 20-year investment. But yesterday we discovered that in this budget coming up, they're going to give $50,000 for the track, which is like, well, this is something. It's not much. It's not going to build a track. But they're giving $2.5 million for 16 pickleball courts. Pickleball, right? Pickleball is like a miniature version of tennis, where you play in the 4 squares, and it's for people who can't play tennis because it's a bit too. It's for seniors, right? It's for over 55s, and it's very popular because we live in a senior, and it's great, and I'm all for it, and I want to start playing it, but I'm not. I can't yet because I'm not 55. Anyway, the point is $2.5 million for 16 pickleball courts, and $50,000 for this amazing community track for the school and the community, and that has ignited people's rage, and people are going to show up to the counter. What do you mean? $2.5 million? And you see, it takes. And I realised in 3 years of fundraising for this, it's just taken this one thing that split people's opinion and made people really angry, and they're going to go and they're going to fight for the track. And it's like, what an interesting, all these different strategies we've taken to try and get people to kind of put the money in.
Yeah,
and it's
you
this
never know,
one
do you?
little thing about a pickleball court that has made people enraged.
But you know why that's happened? It's because people in their 50s vote and teenagers who run around a track can't vote. That's why.
Very interesting.
Discuss. Anyway, gone off the track.
Discuss. Absolutely. Moving swiftly on. Finally, wow, this has been the extended of all extended episodes, but this was brilliant. JS Monroe said, write the book you want to write. We've heard that a lot, right? And we know that that's very important. But he then tagged on, that's so brilliant, write the book you want to write and read.
Yeah.
I know it's so obvious to say it out loud, but that line really hit me. I think we forget. We either write the book that we want to write, or we write the book that we want to read. But how many people actually think of both of those things?
Well, I mean, I do. I mean, I mean, that's where the End of Magic and the Witches of Woodville came from. I was thinking, why is no one? This is the sort of thing I want to read, a kind of subversive fantasy novel. Why is no one really doing it? And why? Well, you know, I remember thinking, let's witches and the Second World War. I'd love to see something like that. And actually, I should do it. So yeah, it's that thing of if no one's doing that thing that you love, then maybe that's the thing that you should do. And I think it's an important lesson to learn, because so often we look at the success of others, we think, so-and-so's written a kind of cozy crime thriller. I should probably write that because that's popular.
Yeah,
it might not be totally, it might not be me, but I that's what I should probably write. No. Write the thing that you would curl up with, at the end of the day or whenever you do your reading.
Totally.
Write that.
Well, if you're passionate about...
Because the other thing is, you'll be reading this bloody thing over and over and over again anyway, until you're utterly sick to the, teeth.
If you're passionate about the subject matter, if you're passionate about your story and your characters, because you're passionate about the era you're writing in or the scenes that you connect with, that passion is going to come through to the reader. It's going to make your book more successful. But also, like you said, Mark, when you are promoting it, that passion keeps you going. Right, it keeps you going through the same questions you get asked in every interview. You're still passionate about it. You want to talk about it. Yeah, ask me that question for the 100th time because I love talking about this. And the problem is when you just follow a trend or a fashion because you think that's the thing that's going to sell your books, you're setting yourself up for failure long term if you don't have a passion in it. And that's why when we wrote Back to Reality, what was the first thing we did? We sat down with a spreadsheet and we wrote down what are we passionate about.
Yeah.
Really,
yeah.
We said, what do we love? What are the things we love? And that's how we discussed. And that's why we love the process of writing it. And we still talk about it to this day. Yeah. Which, by the way, folks, if you haven't bought it, it's still available. Just as a quick reminder, pop along and check it out. So brilliant. Well, listen, thanks so much, folks, for continued support on this podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this very in-depth extended. It's just our way of saying thank you for all the support you give us to help us show up each week and do this. So do tell your friends, though. Word of mouth, as we always say in novels, same podcasts, word of mouth is the thing that spreads the word. So please tell a friend this week about maybe this podcast this week, and maybe they'll sign up and be a patron as well. Well, folks, if you missed the extended, oh man, there was so much. How many 45 minutes did we just do, Mark? 45 minutes. If there's one thing that I can encourage you to sign up to the extended, I gave out a little secret about how producers create music when they have vocalists in their studio. And it's very, very relevant to how you create your characters. Something we haven't talked about before on the podcast before, I think, Mark. So that's worth it alone. I think that will change the way you think about creating characters just by understanding that one thing. So do delve in. Mr. Stay, social media this week.
Well, social media is going to lead directly into something new and exciting that we're talking about. So SC Gowland, Steve Gowland, on Twitter, he's made a public declaration after 5 days of no writing. Steve. He said, I need to get this book finished. So it's public declaration time. His new book, Delusions and Dragons, and he's got the cover for it. It's a great title. He says, I will have finished Delusions and Dragons by Wednesday, 26th of April for publication 1 month later. And that's a deadline. But Steve is on the 200 words a day. He's normally there every single day, and he has missed a few days. I did notice. So yes, hashtag 200 words a day. So that's in the diary, Steve. Good luck. Fingers crossed. But 200 words a day, Mr. D. We're excited about this, aren't we?
So, folks, I'm very excited. We've been doing the 200 word day challenge for I think about 3 years now, and we're just blown away by how much it's changed people's lives. It's got books written that would never have otherwise been written. It's given people this daily writing habit. So we're taking it up to the next level, folks. We're taking it to the next level. We are going to be launching the monthly 200 word a day challenge. So we are now kind of mid-April as we record this. By the time you hear this, it'll be a bit later. But if you would like to take on the challenge of writing a minimum of 200 words every day in May, that rhymes, doesn't it? Then come along to the academy.bestsellerexperiment.com and click on the 200 word challenge link. And you can actually sign up. You will get access into the Academy, the 200 word challenge bit of the Academy. So you'll be able to also have a little preview and see what is in the Academy. But the idea is that you bank your words every day. Now, for people that manage to do this, we are going to talk about this on the podcast. You're going to get name checked. We're going to be monitoring who's doing it. We want to see if you can write 200 words a day minimum and do that for every day in May. So if you want to take on that challenge, come and join us today. If you're already part of the 200 word challenge, you've already signed up, come along and say, I want to do the May challenge. And just as a little teaser, if it's a few days before, it's a week before, start it now and do a warm-up stretch. And we say 7 days, if you can do 7 days in a row, then by the time you get into May, you'll be absolutely flying. But if you want to start on May 1st, that's a Monday, then join us as well. So pop along to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com, click on the 200 word challenge button in the navigation and join us for what's going to be a brilliant celebration of your writing. And hopefully lots more words than you would write. Now, I will also say this. There are many people who say, well, 200 words a day, that's easy. There are people that do NaNoWriMo and do 50,000. You can set your goal of 50,000 words if you want to do that in a month. But you win the challenge if you do a minimum of 200 words a day and you write every day. That's how this works. So it's a lot more achievable, and it's something that everyone can do, whether you're churning out thousands of words a month or if you're just going to be doing 200 words a day. So do join us.
It's about creating a habit. That's the
Exactly.
thing. This isn't just going to last a month. This is going to last you a lifetime. And once you get into this, it makes all the difference. I do it. My wife wrote a novel off the back of it. We got loads of people on there who've done this, but now it's your turn.
Absolutely. And actually, Mark doesn't know this, but we're going to, as part of the fun and games of this over the next couple of months, we're going to delve in and look at an all-timers list of all the people who have submitted their words in the 200-word challenge. And Mark, I looked at the figures the other day, and I'm not going to tell you where you are on the list, but I will reveal that. Because honestly, as somebody, Mark, you've been incredible. Like, honestly, Mark does the 200 word day challenge and he banks words every single day.
Yeah,
it's like practicing what you preach. And
exactly.
We're gonna see where is Mark, but also where are you in that list? And we're going to have an amnesty if you've not submitted your words every day, because we know a lot of people have been doing 200 word challenge and they've not been diligently banking their words. We're going to give you a window of opportunity to bank your words. So we'll see where everyone is in the all-timer challenge.
Brilliant.
Lots to look forward to on that, folks. So brilliant stuff. Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you so much to everyone, especially JS Monroe as our special guest this week, for an incredibly enlightening interview. Thank you to our editors, JD and Dave, and everything they do to make this happen. And Mark, where can people find out about ourselves and contact us on the web?
Yeah, pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact tab there. You can get in touch with us there. Or we're on Facebook, Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram is at BestsellerXP. Drop us a line. And if you've enjoyed the show, subscribe. Give us a rating. Give us a review wherever you get your podcast. It makes all the difference.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, everyone. It's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2. Bye.
Goodbye.